He was the son of a god, born a demigod and destined to be a king, yet his entire life was defined by the relentless wrath of a goddess. Heracles, known to Romans as Hercules, is the greatest, most celebrated, and simultaneously the most tragic hero in Greek mythology, a figure whose extraordinary strength was matched only by the depths of his suffering. His saga is the ultimate exploration of power, fate, and redemption through impossible deeds. Our story begins in Thebes, where fate was twisted by the political machinations of Olympus. Heracles was the son of Zeus, the king of the gods, and a mortal woman named Alcmene, the wife of the Theban general Amphitryon. Zeus, often reckless in his affairs, desired Alcmene and visited her in the form of her husband, lying with her for 3 consecutive nights, a period of time he extended by halting the sun. When Zeus's primary consort, the formidable goddess Hera, learned of this infidelity, her divine jealousy was unleashed, setting a curse upon Heracles that would pursue him until his dying breath. Hera's first act was a cruel manipulation of fate. She delayed the birth of Heracles and tricked Zeus into swearing a reckless oath that the hero born that day from the house of Perseus would be the supreme king. Hera immediately expedited the birth of Heracles' cousin, the weak and cowardly Eurystheus. Thus Heracles, destined for greatness, was condemned to serve his insignificant cousin. This initial act of cosmic injustice defined the rest of his life. Strength would be the instrument of his servitude, not his freedom. The extraordinary nature of the hero was apparent immediately. Only a few months old, while lying in his cradle with his mortal twin brother Iphicles, Hera sent 2 enormous venomous serpents to kill the infant demigod. While Iphicles screamed in terror, the baby Heracles, displaying his nascent divine strength, calmly grabbed the throats of the 2 snakes and strangled them with his bare hands. This feat, often considered his very first trial, announced to the world and to Hera that this was no ordinary child. Heracles' mortal stepfather, Amphitryon, recognized the divine blood and raised the boy in the harsh disciplines of a warrior. He was taught archery by Eurytus, wrestling by Autolycus, and the lyre by Linus, Orpheus's brother. Yet even in his youth, his power was a dangerous, volatile force. During a fit of anger over a poorly taught lesson, the young Heracles struck his music teacher Linus and killed him instantly, an early tragic demonstration that his strength was a curse as much as a blessing. As an adult, Heracles became a champion of Thebes, earning great renown by defeating the Minyans in battle and forcing them to pay tribute. As a reward, the Theban king Creon gave Heracles his daughter Megara in marriage. For a brief period, Heracles knew happiness and tranquility. He and Megara had 3 children, and the hero for a time found peace outside of war. But Hera's rage was merely dormant. The goddess struck the hero with a terrifying spell of divine madness. In a fit of uncontrollable homicidal frenzy, Heracles mistook his own wife, Megara, and his 3 young children for enemies and murdered them all in a fit of delusion. When the madness finally lifted, Heracles awoke to the unimaginable horror of his crime. Overwhelmed by grief and guilt, he considered suicide. He was purified by Thespius and then sought counsel from the Oracle of Delphi. The Pythia commanded that Heracles must atone for his atrocious crime by serving his destined master, King Eurystheus of Mycenae, for 12 years and performing any tasks commanded of him. Only then, and only through these deeds, would he achieve divine immortality. Heracles, the man who murdered his own family, thus began his path toward redemption, a path paved with the blood of monsters and defined by the legendary 12 labors. Condemned by his own madness and bound by the Oracle of Delphi, Heracles, the mightiest hero born to man and god, submitted to the service of his contemptible cousin, King Eurystheus of Mycenae. This servitude was not merely a penance, it was a cosmic plan. Hera, operating through the cowardly king, devised tasks intended not just to humble Heracles but to kill him. The 12 labors are therefore a masterclass in divine persecution, forced atonement, and the ultimate transformation of brute strength into controlled, purposeful heroism. The first 6 labors took place primarily within the Peloponnese, the heartland of Greek civilization, establishing Heracles' renown and defining his iconic image. Labor 1. The Nemean Lion. Eurystheus' first command was simple but deadly. Bring back the hide of the Nemean lion. This beast was no ordinary predator. It was a gigantic monster whose golden fur was impervious to mortal weapons. Arrows and spears merely bounced off its shimmering hide. The lion terrorized the region of Nemea, a symbol of wild, untamable nature. Heracles tracked the lion for days, discovering that his arrows were useless. Realizing that cunning, not weaponry, was required, Heracles trapped the lion in its cave, which had 2 entrances. He blocked one with an enormous boulder, then entered the cave through the remaining opening. The ensuing confrontation was a primal struggle between man and beast. Heracles threw aside his bow and club, grappling with the lion using only his hands. He wrestled the monster into submission, using his superhuman strength to hold the beast in a crushing embrace, eventually strangling it to death. The challenge then became skinning the impervious beast. Athena, Heracles' patron goddess and Zeus's daughter, offered a divine suggestion: use the lion's own razor-sharp claw to cut its hide. Heracles did so, forever after wearing the lion's impervious hide as his cloak and armor, and its snarling head as his helmet. This established his iconic visual identity and provided him with perpetual magical protection. When Heracles returned, Eurystheus was so terrified of the lion's hide and the hero's raw power that he refused to let Heracles enter the city gates again, instead issuing all future commands through a herald from the safety of his citadel. Labor 2. The Lernaean Hydra. The second task was designed by Hera herself to be truly unwinnable. Heracles was sent to slay the Lernaean Hydra, a swamp-dwelling serpent with 9 heads, one of which was immortal. Worse still, cutting off any one head resulted in 2 new heads instantly growing back in its place. The Hydra's breath and blood were also intensely venomous. Heracles brought his nephew Iolaus to assist him. The hero fought the Hydra, but the task seemed endless. The more heads he chopped, the more the monster regenerated. Hera, determined to ensure his failure, sent a giant crab to distract Heracles by biting his foot. Heracles crushed the crab and, coordinating with Iolaus, devised a strategy. Heracles would cut off a head, and immediately, Iolaus would use a burning brand to cauterize the neck stump, preventing the regeneration. They systematically beheaded the monster. When they reached the 9th immortal head, Heracles chopped it off and, following the oracle's guidance, buried it under a huge rock to prevent it from causing further harm. Before leaving, Heracles dipped his arrows into the Hydra's potent venom, creating the deadly Hydra arrows, weapons that would ensure any creature struck by them would suffer an agonizing, inescapable death. This act of creating a universally lethal weapon would have tragic consequences later in the hero's life. Eurystheus, however, refused to count this labor, stating that Heracles had received aid from Iolaus, violating the terms of the trial. Labor 3. The Ceranian Hind. The third task was intended to force Heracles into a conflict with the gods. Eurystheus commanded him to capture the Ceranian hind or stag alive. This hind was sacred to the goddess Artemis and possessed brazen hooves and golden antlers. Injuring such a sacred animal meant incurring the direct fatal wrath of a powerful Olympian deity. Heracles spent an entire year tracking the swift creature across the length and breadth of Greece, from Arcadia to the Hyperborean lands in the north. This trial was a test of endurance, restraint, and discipline. Finally, as the hind paused to cross the river Ladon, Heracles shot it with a non-venomous arrow, carefully nicking the tendon in its leg to immobilize it. As Heracles carried the hind back, he was confronted by Artemis and her brother Apollo, who accused him of sacrilege. Heracles, showing respect and wisdom, placed the blame squarely on Eurystheus, citing his mandated servitude and the divine command of the oracle. Satisfied with the explanation and the hero's obvious distress, Artemis permitted him to take the hind to Mycenae, provided it be immediately released unharmed afterward. Heracles briefly displayed the living hind to the terrified Eurystheus before releasing it, demonstrating his mastery over nature and his pious obedience to the gods. Labor 4. The Erymanthian Boar. The fourth task was a test of physical strength combined with a psychological deterrent for the king. Heracles was tasked with capturing the ferocious Erymanthian boar alive. This was a massive, monstrous beast that ravaged the region of Arcadia. Heracles drove the boar from the dense thicket by continually shouting and beating the undergrowth. He chased the animal up the snow-covered slopes of Mount Erymanthus. Exhausted by the chase and immobilized by the deep snow, the boar was easy prey. Heracles bound it and carried it back, balancing the enormous, struggling beast on his shoulders. When he arrived in Mycenae, the sight of the live, squealing boar being carried by the terrifying lion-skinned Heracles caused King Eurystheus to panic. The king shrieked and immediately hid in a large bronze storage jar, a pithos, demanding that Heracles dispose of the beast and never again bring a live monster into the city. The entire spectacle served to underscore the king's inadequacy and the absurd nature of Heracles' service. A side mission during this labor brought tragedy. While resting, Heracles encountered the Centaur Pholus. Pholus, despite warnings, opened a jar of wine sacred to all centaurs. The smell provoked a violent, drunken brawl with the centaurs, which Heracles subdued with his arrows. Tragically, in the chaos, the wise centaur Chiron was accidentally struck by one of the Hydra arrows. Chiron, being immortal, could not die, but the venom caused eternal agony, forcing him to surrender his immortality to Prometheus to finally achieve release. This incident served as a stark reminder of the poisonous consequence of Heracles' power. Labor 5. The Augean Stables. This was the first task designed specifically to humiliate Heracles and discredit him. Eurystheus commanded him to clean the stables of King Augeas in a single day. King Augeas possessed an enormous herd of cattle, and his stables had never been cleaned in decades, resulting in an accumulation of filth so vast it was nearly a mile high. Eurystheus believed the task was impossible for one man and profoundly degrading for a hero. Heracles, however, showed his intelligence and engineering genius, refusing to touch the manure with his hands. He negotiated a deal with Augeas, a share of the cattle should he succeed, and then accomplished the task by diverting the courses of two major rivers, the Alpheus and the Peneus, through the stables. The torrential flow washed the stables completely clean in a single day. Eurystheus, upon hearing of the success, refused to count this labor, claiming Heracles was motivated by the payment promised by Augeas, not by pure service, thus failing the spirit of the law. This rejection, which led to a future war between Heracles and Augeas for justice, highlighted the relentless political sabotage underlying Heracles' servitude. Labor 6. The Stymphalian Birds. The final Peloponnesian labor required Heracles to defeat a flock of monstrous Stymphalian birds that infested a marshy lake in Arcadia. These creatures had brass beaks, sharp metallic claws, and were capable of launching their brass feathers like deadly arrows upon their victims. Heracles could not approach the swamp due to the poisonous air and the dense foliage. Once again, divine aid was required. His patron Athena provided him with a pair of huge bronze rattles, or clappers, forged by the god Hephaestus. Heracles climbed a nearby mountain and clashed the massive bronze clappers loudly and repeatedly. The deafening metallic noise terrified the birds, forcing them to take to the air. As they flew above the foliage, Heracles drew his bow and shot them down with his Hydra venom-tipped arrows. The birds were either slain or chased away permanently, thus cleansing the region of their terror. With the first 6 Peloponnesian labors complete, Heracles had established himself as the ultimate champion of Greece, demonstrating that his power could be controlled and channeled into acts of civilization. But Eurystheus' fear and Hera's hatred remained undiminished, leading to the next 6 labors, tasks that would take the hero far beyond the known world, to the very limits of life and death. With the completion of the first 6 labors, the Pelagian deeds, Heracles' atonement entered its second, more perilous phase, the 6 Panhellenic or foreign labors. These tasks were designed to send the hero far beyond the safety of the Greek heartland, testing his navigation, diplomacy, and resourcefulness against monsters and kings in the unknown reaches of the ancient world. Labor 7. The Cretan Bull. For his 7th labor, Eurystheus commanded Heracles to travel to the island of Crete and capture the Cretan Bull. This magnificent yet destructive beast had been either sent by Poseidon to King Minos or, in some versions, released by Minos after he failed to sacrifice it to the sea god. The bull was ravaging the island, breeding chaos and destruction. Heracles traveled to Crete, where he approached King Minos. Minos, pleased that someone was finally capable of solving his problem, readily agreed to let Heracles take the bull, provided the hero captured it alone. This time, no trickery or sabotage from Eurystheus was involved, but the task was immense. Heracles confronted the massive bull, which possessed incredible strength and fiery breath. The ensuing battle was a grueling display of force. Heracles wrestled the bull into submission, using his overwhelming might and grappling techniques to choke and exhaust the beast. Once subdued, Heracles mounted the bull and, using it as a ship, rowed it across the Aegean Sea back to the Peloponnese. Eurystheus, predictably, was terrified by the sight of the magnificent living monster. He hid and, true to form, refused to keep the bull. Instead, he released it to roam the Greek countryside, where it continued to cause destruction until it was finally killed later by the hero Theseus. This labor reinforced Heracles' role as a purveyor of order, even when his overseer lacked the courage to benefit from it. Labor 8. The Mares of Diomedes. The 8th labor was a task of extreme danger and moral horror. Bring back the 4 man-eating horses of King Diomedes of Thrace. These horses, named Podargos, Lampon, Xanthos, and Dinos, were fed on the flesh of any unsuspecting stranger who crossed into Diomedes' kingdom. Heracles sailed to Thrace, bringing with him a small contingent, which often included his young companion Abderus. Heracles overpowered the grooms and led the savage mares away. However, King Diomedes and his Thracian warriors pursued them. Heracles left the mares in the care of Abderus while he fought off the king's army. In the ensuing battle, Heracles slew Diomedes and defeated his army. But the delay proved fatal for Abderus. The savage mares, reverting to their carnivorous nature, turned on the boy and devoured him. Overcome with grief and rage, Heracles founded the city of Abdera in his companion's honor. To finally subdue the mares, Heracles resorted to a shocking act. He fed the savage animals the flesh of their own master, King Diomedes. Once they had eaten human flesh from a king's body, their fierce, unnatural craving was broken. Their rage subdued, Heracles easily led them back to Eurystheus, who once again released the fearsome beasts. The mares were eventually killed by wild animals on Mount Olympus. This labor was a crucial turning point, showing the tragic cost of Heracles' success and the brutal, often morally ambiguous, nature of his heroism. Labor 9. The Girdle of Hippolyta. The 9th labor provided a welcome change of pace, focusing on diplomacy and desire, though it was quickly derailed by Hera's persistent malice. Heracles was sent to retrieve the magnificent golden girdle of Hippolyta, the queen of the Amazons. The girdle was given to Hippolyta by her father Ares, the god of war, and symbolized her authority. Eurystheus wanted it for his daughter Admete. Heracles sailed to Themyscira, the land of the Amazons, a fierce tribe of warrior women who lived on the shores of the Black Sea. Heracles intended to use diplomacy, not war, and initially he succeeded. Queen Hippolyta, impressed by the hero's strength and reputation, and perhaps swayed by her own attraction, willingly agreed to give him the girdle as a gift. Peace and a swift resolution were at hand. However, Hera could not permit this peaceful outcome. Disguising herself as an Amazon warrior, Hera spread a vicious rumor among the tribe that Heracles intended to kidnap their queen and enslave them all. Driven into a rage by this deceit, the Amazons launched a massive, sudden attack on Heracles and his small crew. Heracles, fearing betrayal by Hippolyta herself, instinctively killed her in the ensuing chaos, tearing the girdle from her body as he fought. The diplomatic mission ended in tragic bloodshed, forcing Heracles to fight his way out of the city and escape by sea, bearing the costly girdle. This labor demonstrated that even when the hero sought a peaceful solution, Hera's curse would inevitably convert any interaction into violence and sorrow. Labor 10. The Cattle of Geryon. The 10th labor took Heracles to the extreme western edge of the world, beyond the Pillars of Hercules, Gibraltar, to the island of Erythea, the Red Island. The task was to capture the herd of unique red cattle belonging to the monstrous Geryon and bring them back to Mycenae. Geryon was a terrifying figure, a giant with 3 heads and 3 sets of bodies, or perhaps 3 bodies joined at the waist, and 6 arms. His cattle were guarded by the giant herdsman Eurytion and the 2-headed dog Orthrus, brother of the infamous Cerberus. The journey itself was a feat of endurance. Heracles crossed the Libyan desert, where the heat was so intense he grew angry and shot an arrow at the sun god Helios. Impressed by the hero's audacity, Helios gifted Heracles a giant golden cup, or bowl, which he used as a boat to sail across the ocean to Erythea. Upon reaching the island, Heracles first swiftly dispatched Orthrus and Eurytion. Then he faced the multi-bodied Geryon in a final climactic battle. Heracles defeated the giant by using his deadly Hydra arrows, shooting them with such force and accuracy that they pierced Geryon's bodies and killed him instantly. The long journey back to Greece with the massive herd of red cattle was a year-long saga in itself, featuring numerous skirmishes with jealous thieves and local kings. The successful completion of this journey, which physically demarcated the boundaries of the known world, symbolized the final conquest of the chaotic, monstrous elements beyond Greek control. To commemorate his journey, Heracles placed the famous Pillars of Hercules on the opposite shores of the Strait of Gibraltar, a lasting marker of his passage to the edge of the earth. With the successful return from the far western edge of the world, Heracles had completed 10 labors, but King Eurystheus refused to acknowledge 2 of them, the Hydra and the Augean stables, claiming they were either completed with aid or for payment. Thus, 2 more labors, the most difficult and mythical of all, were demanded, tasks that would force Heracles to confront the very gods and the boundaries between life and death. Labor 11, the Apples of the Hesperides. The 11th labor required Heracles to retrieve the golden apples of the Hesperides. These apples were the sacred wedding gift given by Gaia, Earth, to Hera upon her marriage to Zeus. They were guarded in a mythical garden at the edge of the world, protected by the Hesperides, the daughters of Atlas, and the 100-headed dragon, Ladon, whose many voices never slept. The challenge of this labor was not physical confrontation, but knowledge and wit, as Heracles had no idea where the garden was located. His journey took him through countless lands and included many side quests. First, he wrestled the sea god Nereus, the Old Man of the Sea, who possessed the power to shapeshift. Heracles held Nereus tight through all his transformations until the god, exhausted, finally revealed the location of the garden. Next, his path led him through Libya, where he faced the giant Antaeus, a son of Gaia. Antaeus was invincible as long as he maintained contact with his Mother Earth, gaining renewed strength every time he was thrown down. Heracles realized this trick and, lifting the giant high above the ground in a crushing bear hug, crushed him to death while holding him suspended in midair, defeating him through intellectual understanding of his weakness. Finally, Heracles reached the Titan Atlas, the giant who bore the weight of the heavens on his shoulders. Atlas was the father of the Hesperides. Heracles devised a plan. He would offer to temporarily hold the sky for Atlas while the Titan, who was able to enter the garden without harm, retrieved the apples. Heracles took the crushing weight of the celestial sphere upon his own shoulders. Atlas, feeling the relief of freedom for the first time in millennia, decided to trick Heracles and refused to take the sky back, offering instead to deliver the apples himself. Heracles, using his quick wit, pretended to agree but asked Atlas to hold the heavens for just a moment while Heracles adjusted the lion's skin on his shoulders to get a better grip. The gullible Atlas took the weight back. The moment the Titan was burdened again, Heracles snatched the apples and walked away, leaving Atlas once more holding the heavens. The successful return of the apples proved Heracles could use his mind as effectively as his muscles. Eurystheus, bewildered by the apples' divine nature, promptly returned them, as they could not remain in the mortal world and were taken back by Athena to the gods. Labor 12, the capture of Cerberus. The 12th and final labor was the ultimate test of courage, demanded by Eurystheus in the desperate hope of finally killing the hero. Bring back Cerberus, the monstrous 3-headed hound that guarded the gates of the Underworld. This task involved the absolute confrontation with death itself. To prepare for this journey, Heracles first sought initiation into the Eleusinian mysteries, a cult dedicated to Demeter and Persephone. By being purified in the rites, Heracles hoped to ensure his safe passage into and out of the realm of the dead. Heracles descended into the underworld through a cave at Taenarum in Laconia. His descent was not easy. Upon entering, he immediately rescued his friend Theseus, who was chained to a chair of forgetfulness for attempting to kidnap Persephone. Heracles approached Hades, the god of the dead, and requested permission to take Cerberus to the surface. Hades, respecting the hero's divine lineage and the necessity of his atonement, agreed, but set a single terrifying condition. Heracles had to subdue the savage beast using no weapons, only his bare hands and the lion skin he wore. Heracles found Cerberus near the gates of Acheron. The battle was immense. The 3 heads of the hound, One with a viper's mane, another spitting venom, lunged and bit. Heracles wrestled the beast, using his Nemean Lion skin for protection, but relying solely on his superhuman grip. He wrapped his hands around the hound's central neck, squeezing with relentless force until the immense monster was subdued and choking into submission. He dragged the bound Cerberus back through the underworld into the world of the living. The sight of the monstrous, barking, three-headed guardian terrified all mortals. When Heracles presented the beast to King Eurystheus, the cowardly king, already hiding in his bronze jar, shrieked in absolute terror and immediately begged Heracles to return the creature to Hades, releasing the hero from his servitude. With the return of Cerberus to the underworld, Heracles had completed his 12 years of service and his 12 labors. He had repaid his blood debt, cleansed himself of the madness, and achieved what no other mortal had done, mastering the forces of nature, subduing the greatest monsters, and even conquering death itself. Heracles was finally free. Freed from his 12-year sentence and the bondage to Eurystheus, Heracles finally stood as the undisputed champion of the ancient world. He had achieved redemption through his monumental labors, but the years of freedom that followed were often fraught with personal struggles, new wars, and the continued, subtle influence of Hera's curse. The years of freedom and the quest for a new bride. Now released from his obligation, Heracles felt compelled to seek vengeance for past injustices. He led an army against King Augeas, who had refused to pay him for cleaning the stables, and against King Laomedon of Troy, who had once cheated Heracles out of promised immortal horses. Heracles successfully conquered both cities, demonstrating his capacity to mobilize and lead armies, not just fight alone. Heracles also sought to remarry. His affections turned to Iole, the beautiful daughter of King Eurytus of Oechalia. When Eurytus refused to give his daughter to a man who had murdered his own first wife, Heracles, seeking to win her hand, participated in a great archery contest set up by the king. Heracles won the contest easily, but Eurytus still refused. In a fit of lingering rage, Heracles stole the king's prize mares. The subsequent attempt to clear his name led to further violence and tragedy, often fueled by the volatile mix of Heracles' passion and his underlying mental fragility. The second marriage and the poisoned gift Heracles eventually married Deianira, the sister of Meleager. Their journey together brought them to the river Evenus, guarded by the Centaur Nessus. Nessus offered to carry Deianira across the treacherous river while Heracles swam. Halfway across, Nessus, overcome by lust, attempted to rape Deianira. Heracles, hearing his wife's screams, immediately drew his bow and shot Nessus with a deadly, Hydra venom-tipped arrow. As the Centaur lay dying, he played a final wicked trick on Deianira. He told her to collect some of his blood, claiming it was a powerful love potion that would ensure Heracles would never desire another woman. Gullible and insecure about her husband's wandering eye, Deianira believed him and secretly kept the poisoned blood. Years later, when Heracles prepared to take Iole as a concubine after sacking her city, Deianira feared she was losing her husband's love. She coated a splendid robe with the centaur's blood, the so-called love potion, and sent it to Heracles as a gift to wear for a sacrifice to Zeus. The moment Heracles donned the robe, the fatal Hydra venom-laced blood reacted with the heat of the sacrificial fire. The poison did not kill him instantly. Instead, it began to fuse to his skin, causing unimaginable burning agony that tore the flesh from his bones when he tried to remove it. Realizing the deceit, a distraught Deianira took her own life out of guilt and sorrow. The apotheosis, the death and the path to Olympus. Overwhelmed by pain that even his superhuman body could not withstand, Heracles knew his mortal life was ending. He ordered his companions to carry him to Mount Olympus. There, the mighty hero constructed his own funeral pyre. Unable to light it himself due to the crippling agony, he gifted his legendary bow and arrows to his friend Philoctetes in exchange for lighting the pyre. As the flames consumed the mortal Heracles, a divine transformation occurred. Zeus, watching from Olympus, declared that the mortal half of his son was dying, but his divine essence would ascend. A great cloud descended upon Mount Olympus. The purification by fire burned away the mortal corruption, the madness, and the residual influence of Hera's curse. The divine spirit of Heracles was lifted to Mount Olympus. Hera's relentless hatred was finally quenched. Recognizing the incredible endurance and heroic virtue Heracles had demonstrated, she finally reconciled with him. As a sign of her acceptance, she gave him her own daughter, Hebe, the goddess of youth, as his eternal wife. Heracles, the ultimate tragic figure, the slave, the murderer, the champion, and the sufferer, achieved his ultimate reward. He was immortalized, taking his place among the gods, forever remembered not just for the chaos he created, but for the impossible deeds that ultimately brought order to the world. His life serves as the ultimate legend of a hero who was forged not by fate, but by overcoming the most intense suffering imaginable.